The White House says the U.S. trade deficit with China is too high, but it may be a lot lower than it seems. The U.S. imported $463 billion in goods from China in 2016 and exported $116 billion. Do the math. Subtract imports from exports and you get a U.S. deficit of $347 billion. President Trump says based on this calculation, China is beating the U.S. in trade. The question is by how much? Well, not by as much as the first set of figures suggests if you factor in a second set of figures. In 2016, the U.S. ran a surplus with China of $37 billion on trade-in services. That is the largest surplus the U.S. had with any of its trading partners. If we just look at U.S.-China trade in goods, the deficit is still lower, and here's why. Not all imports from China are actually Chinese. A big chunk of them are so-called intermediate goods that are parts made in other countries, assembled in China, and then shipped back for sale. According to Oxford University, when we take out the value of these non-Chinese intermediate goods, it would cut the size of U.S. trade deficit with China by half. That brings it close to the deficit the U.S. had with the European Union. Consider the example of the iPhone again. To produce the 2009 version, Chinese companies used $11 worth of parts imported from the U.S. companies, and $172 worth of components from other countries. But when they were shipped back to the U.S., the phone was sold for around $600. And what did the Chinese companies earn out of all this? Roughly $6.5, or just 1% of the retail price. While Apple and other American companies received 70% of the retail value. However, U.S. official trade data shows nearly the full value of an iPhone belonging to China. That apparently inflated the size of the U.S. trade deficit. Global supply chains make U.S. trade figures misleading because they show where products are imported from, but don't show who benefits from the trade. And here's one more myth to bust, that trade is a job killer. Let's listen to President Trump.
We will defend our workers.
Defend them from what? Try robots. No, not Autobots and Decepticons. These robots. U.S. research shows automation has been wiping out U.S. jobs and trade has been creating them. Between 2010 and 2015, U.S. imports from China went up, and so did the number of U.S. manufacturing jobs. So, simplistic arguments on trade have proven popular, but a far cry from reality. Finally, here's another factor skewing trade figures. China wants to buy more high-tech goods from the U.S., but the U.S. bans their sale out of national security concerns. By some estimates, if the U.S. lowered barriers for high-tech exports to China to the same level as France, it would cut the deficit with China by as much as 34%. So, from the Chinese perspective, any reasonable negotiation on cutting the trade deficit will have to start with how to calculate it.